The entire internet branded me a cold-blooded sociopath after I sat in silence at the press conference while my lawyer announced I was cutting ties with my biological parents and filing for divorce. My 3-year marriage was dragged through the mud on social media as the ultimate gold digger success story. Yet no one realized that on the day I disappeared, I left on a Lockwood private jet. I was welcomed back into the ranks of the European elite by hundreds of security personnel in black suits. The man they dismissed as a penniless country bumpkin was actually the secret chairman of the Stellar Group. With a single signature, I liquidated the Miller family and sent the Hayes family spiraling into bankruptcy. Even when Miriam tried to use her own life as a final pawn, I watched with total indifference as she died on the operating table before donating every cent of her estate to charity. I never offered a single word of explanation to the public. Long before that press conference where they thought the truth had finally been revealed, I had already made a choice. I was going to use every resource at my disposal to rewrite the ending for the man named Edward who had been their doormat for the last 4 years. The moment I stepped onto the private jet my adoptive mother had sent, my phone began vibrating with dozens of missed calls from Miriam. Below the missed calls, a flood of unread messages fill my screen. The press conference starts in 30 minutes. Edward, where the hell are you? Don't say I didn't warn you. If you don't show up today, don't you ever think about touching me again. 4 years ago, a single frown from her would have left me anxious for days. Now, my heart felt eerily quiet and absurdly cold. I powered down the phone and popped out the SIM card with a quick flick of my wrist, watching it vanish into the cabin's crevices. The jet began to taxi down the runway, the G-force pinning me against the leather seat. Looking through the window, the Chicago skyline began to shrink rapidly behind me. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent goodbye to Miriam and my biological parents. Our lives should never have intersected 4 years ago. Starting today, that connection is severed forever. Meanwhile, back at the press conference in Chicago, Miriam sent one final message. When she received no reply, she lost her temper and dialed my number once more. Instead of the usual ringing, she was met with a cold, automated voice. The recording informed her that the number was no longer in service. Miriam's expression darkened instantly as she stared at her screen. The two people sitting beside her, my biological parents, leaned in anxiously. They asked if she had reached me, but Miriam only shook her head in silence. My father's face fell, and my mother's eyes welled up with tears until she began to sob openly in front of the gathered crowd. A mob of reporters was waiting outside. If Edward didn't show up, the media would conclude that Joey was a fraud. They needed Edward there to play his part so they could look like the victims. I am so incredibly disappointed in Edward, my mother cried. Joey is in such a crisis, and his own brother won't say a single word to help him. I don't know what I did to deserve such a selfish son. My father pulled her close to comfort her, telling her not to worry. He claimed that even though Edward grew up with those questionable people and lacked proper breeding, his devotion to Miriam was real. He was certain that if Miriam demanded his presence, Edward wouldn't dare refuse. He looked completely confident, but Miriam sat there in a daze. Only a few days ago, she would have agreed with him. She used to believe that I would come running the second she called. However, she couldn't stop thinking about how cold I had been lately. This morning, I had actually pushed her away when she tried to get close to me. A wave of unexplained panic began to wash over her. I'm going to find him, she said, starting to rise. Just then, the door to the green room swung open. Her assistant rushed in, breathless, and announced that her husband had arrived. Miriam's eyes lit up with relief as she hurried out on her heels. She let out a long breath, only now realizing she had been holding it. She wasn't sure if she was relieved because Joey might be cleared or because my arrival proved I still loved her. When she reached the entrance, I was nowhere to be found. Instead, a man in a perfectly tailored suit stood there waiting. He introduced himself as Edward's legal counsel and informed her that he would be attending the conference in my place. Miriam's expression turned to stone. "Where is Edward?" she demanded. The lawyer gave a professional smile and explained that I was unable to attend the proceedings. Unable to attend? Miriam asked, her brow furrowing. Is he sick? She suddenly recalled how pale and exhausted I had looked earlier that morning. Before she could ask more, my biological parents emerged. Their faces darkened when they saw I wasn't there. My father growled, asking why Edward had sent a lawyer to deal with his own family, and if this was some kind of publicity stunt. That's enough, my mother muttered. At this point, we just need someone to talk to the press. If we don't give them something, those reporters will tear us to pieces. At that moment, both my parents and Miriam assumed I had hired the lawyer to formally declare that Joey was indeed my biological brother. Without another word, the lawyer, Mr. Davis, walked out onto the stage. Good morning, everyone. My name is Davis, and I am the legal counsel for Edward Miller, he began. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. I've been instructed by my client to issue two formal statements. First, Mr. Miller has decided decided to legally and permanently sever all ties with the Miller family. As of today, he no longer has any relation to them whatsoever. The room erupted into chaos. Severing ties? It was the ultimate confirmation of the rumors that the Millers had favored a fraud and driven their real son away. My biological parents stood there, their faces turning a ghostly white with rage. Mr. Davis continued in a calm, measured voice. Second, Mr. Miller has officially filed for divorce from Mrs. Miriam Hayes. The legal proceedings have already begun. Divorce, Miriam whispered, looking as if she had been struck. He was actually leaving her. Before she could even process the shock, the gathered press corps went into a frenzy. Ms. Hayes, is this divorce because of Joey Miller? One reporter screamed. Is it true that Joey didn't just take Edward's inheritance, but his wife as well? The noise became deafening. Security guards and bodyguards surged forward to shield Miriam and my parents, blocking the cameras as they hurried them toward the back exit. At that exact moment, my jet touched down in Milan. As I stepped out of the private terminal, I was met by hundreds of security personnel in black suits, standing in two perfect, disciplined rows. They bowed in unison, welcoming me home. Then my adoptive parents, the Lockwoods, rushed forward from the crowd and pulled me into a fierce embrace. Edward, thank God you're back, my adoptive father said. If you had waited any longer, I would have rented out every plaza in Europe just to welcome you home. I smiled and told him he was being dramatic again. His over-the-top personality was exactly why I had spent years keeping them at a distance in the States. I pretended to be annoyed, but I couldn't stop myself from smiling. It felt incredible to be loved and prioritized like this. My adoptive mother, her eyes shimmering with tears, hugged me again. She told me that nothing else mattered now that I was finally home. She pulled back to look me over, her frown deepening. You've lost so much weight, she noted. What on earth did those Miller people and Miriam do to you? A dangerous glint appeared in her eyes at the mention of their names. I hadn't given her the specifics, but I knew her well enough to know she had already investigated exactly how the Millers and Miriam had treated her son. The anger in her expression intensified. Edward, are you absolutely sure you don't want us to handle this for you? She asked. You know that with one phone call, we could wipe out both the Hayes and Miller families, she continued. I knew she wasn't exaggerating, but I simply shook my head. There's no need. They're just strangers to me now, I replied. I had already wasted 4 years of my life on them. I wasn't going to give them another second. I put my arm around her shoulder and told her I was craving her homemade pasta. I got into the car, and once we were out of earshot, my adoptive father turned to my mother. Are we really just going to let them get away with it? He whispered. My adoptive mother gave a cold, sharp laugh. Of course not, she replied. I have a detailed list of everything they did to my son. They aren't getting off that easily. Dear, start the preparations. Her face was like a mask of ice. In 1 month, we will take Edward back to the States. I'm going to make every single one of them pay for what they did. Meanwhile, the press conference in Chicago had descended into total madness. As they were leaving, a trembling Joey grabbed Miriam's hand. Miriam, he's trying to destroy me. Everyone knows I'm not the biological heir now. They're going to kick me out. Miriam frowned, her mind clearly elsewhere. She told him the Millers had always loved him like a son. Joey choked back a sob, arguing that it didn't matter because he wasn't their blood. I just wanted a family, but my real parents abandoned me. Joey cried. You're the only person in this world I truly love. Miriam looked down into his eyes, which were brimming with practiced devotion. Miriam, I know you've always loved me. The only thing in our way was that marriage. Now that he's filed for divorce, we can finally be together, right? He pulled her into his arms and leaned in to kiss her. Miriam froze. She had spent years fantasizing about being intimate with Joey. When she was with me, she used to picture Joey's face. But as his lips touched hers, she felt absolutely nothing. Instead, my face flashed in her mind, unbidden. She thought of my tense skin and my presence. She suddenly shoved Joey away. He looked at her, completely stunned. Who said we were divorced? She snapped. Until I signed those papers, he is still my husband. She threw open the car door and left him sitting there alone. Miriam rushed back to our house and started screaming my name. She stormed through the rooms, demanding that I come out and explain myself. The house was silent. Eventually, she called the driver over and asked if I had come home after leaving the club that morning. The driver looked confused and told her that I hadn't come back at all. He said I had gone straight to the airport. Miriam felt the blood drain from her face. The driver stammered that he thought she knew. He mentioned that I had taken a call in the car and said I was going home, even calling the person on the other end Mom. Miriam stood frozen. She knew I wouldn't be calling Mrs. Miller that. It had to be the woman who raised me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. I had gone back to Italy. She ran upstairs to my study and found it completely empty. My passport and all my belongings were gone. She realized then that I wasn't just divorcing her. I was leaving the country entirely. entirely. A crushing weight settled on her chest. She turned to her assistant and barked an order to prepare the private jet for a flight to Italy immediately. As the assistant was making the calls, Miriam's mother called her. She was hysterical, screaming that Joey had tried to kill himself. Miriam gripped her phone. She knew the jet would take time to ready anyway. She told the assistant to keep working on the flight while she dealt with the emergency. The assistant asked for a destination city. Miriam stopped in her tracks. She realized she had no idea where my family actually lived in Italy. I might have told her 100 times, but she had never bothered to listen. She felt a surge of frustration at her own negligence. She told her staff to track every flight to Italy that day to find where I had landed. By the time she reached the hospital, Joey was in the middle of a breakdown. "You should have let me die," Joey wailed. "Everyone knows I'm a fraud. My life is over." In the past, Miriam would have been moved by his dramatics. But today, she just felt exhausted. My image kept returning to her mind. She remembered how I handled pain. No matter how much they hurt me, I never threw tantrums or used my emotions to manipulate people. A sharp pang of guilt hit Miriam as she entered the hospital room. My father's voice was booming as he ranted about Edward's decision to divorce and cut off the family. "The whole world thinks we're monsters now," he shouted. My mother added coldly that this was likely Edward's plan all along. "He's making us look like abusers just to spite us," she said. "He's always been manipulative. No shame at all." It was hard to believe a mother could talk about her own son that way. They looked up as Miriam entered. They demanded to know if she had found me, saying that when she did, she should bring me there to kneel and apologize to Joey. Miriam's patience was wearing thin. "He went back to Italy," she said shortly. Both of my parents were stunned into silence. "He went back to those people," my mother shrieked. "We're his real parents, and he goes back to those beggars?" My father just scoffed. "Let him go," he said. "He'll come crawling back in a week. There's no way he's giving up his inheritance for a couple of peasants." Miriam wasn't so sure. She reminded them that he had already filed for divorce. Even saying the word made her heart ache, but my parents just laughed it off. "Oh, honey, you don't actually think he's serious, do you?" they said. "He's just playing hard to get. He's acting out so you'll pay more attention to him." Before Miriam could argue, her assistant returned with news. He reported that my name wasn't on the manifest for any commercial flights to Italy that day. My mother laughed triumphantly. "See, I told you. The divorce, the trip to Italy, it's all just show. He's probably hiding in a hotel somewhere," she added dismissively. Miriam felt a secret sense of relief. She thought I was still in the city. But if I was still around, where was I? Her anxiety grew. Just as she was about to leave to look for me, her father's phone rang. He answered the call, and his face went white. "Stellar Group just canceled all our contracts," he gasped. Miriam froze. Her father hung up, trembling. "We're in trouble, Miriam. Stellar just pulled out of every single project. They cut off the Hayes Group, too." Now it was Miriam's turn to panic. Stellar Group was a titan in the industry. Over half of both their families' revenue came from Stellar contracts. If Stellar pulled out, they would both be bankrupt within months. Miriam spent the next several days in a frantic blur, trying to reach someone at Stellar while simultaneously searching for me. She originally thought I was just acting out and would come home eventually. But after a week of silence, she started to worry. She asked her assistant one more time if I had really not gone to Italy. "I've checked every commercial manifest," the assistant replied. "He's not on them. The only outlier was a private jet with a seal manifest that we can't access." "A private jet?" Miriam whispered. She knew I didn't have access to the Miller jet, and hers hadn't moved. She couldn't imagine how I could have gotten on one. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Just as she was considering flying to Italy herself, her father called again. "Mr. Lockwood is coming to Chicago in 2 days with his family," her father said. "This is our only chance to save the companies." The Lockwoods were European royalty in the business world. Miriam knew that the Lockwood family was the true power behind the Stellar Group. She had been unable to get a meeting with anyone at Stellar, so the Lockwoods' visit was a miracle. She decided to put her search for me on hold to focus on the meeting. 3 days later, the Lockwood family hosted a gala at the most exclusive hotel in downtown Chicago. Every major player in the country was in attendance. Miriam arrived with Joey on her arm, followed by my biological parents. They were awestruck by the sheer number of luxury vehicles lining the entrance. Miriam's friends were already there, gossiping about the incredible wealth on display. They were stunned by the scale of the event. "I heard the Lockwood heir is here tonight," one of them whispered. "He's the most eligible bachelor in Europe. I can't wait to see him." While everyone was busy talking about the mysterious heir, Miriam turned and saw a blonde woman approaching. The woman greeted her with a polite smile, noting that they had met before. Miriam's face hardened. "What are you doing here?" she asked. It was the same blonde woman she had seen me with earlier. The woman smiled and handed over a business card. She introduced herself as Isabella Frost, a senior executive at Stellar Group. "I believe we have some details regarding the contract terminations to discuss," Isabella said. My father jumped in, surprised that Miriam knew someone at Stellar. "I saw her with Edward," Miriam said darkly. quickly. My parents were shocked that I had any connection to someone so high up in the company. My father's eyes widened. Wait, Miss Frost, did you cancel our contracts because of Edward? Isabella raised an eyebrow, but before she could speak, my father started pleading. He told her not to believe a word that heartless boy said. He's just jealous of his brother, my father insisted, convinced of his own lie. He's just trying to cause trouble for us. Their business with Stellar had been great for years. It only made sense to him that I was the reason for the sudden change. He convinced himself that I had sabotaged them. He imagined a whole scenario where I had gone to Stellar to badmouth the family businesses just to get revenge. He became increasingly furious. Edward is a curse, my father spat. He did nothing but cause trouble at home, and now he's trying to ruin our livelihoods. If I find him, I'll kill him, he shouted. Isabella's expression went cold. She warned him that if he said another word against me, there would be consequences. Stellar was actually planning on a gradual phase out to help your cash flow, she said. But if you insult him one more time, I will pull every cent tonight and personally ensure that you both go bankrupt. They all stood there in shock, unable to believe she was defending me. Joey finally spoke up with a sneer. Miss Frost, you're just an employee. You don't make the final decisions at Stellar. You're willing to risk your career for Edward? He asked. What exactly is he doing for you that's worth losing your job over? He looked at Miriam, glad to see her expression darkening. But to his surprise, Isabella just laughed in his face. You're right. I'm just a manager, she said, her voice turning sharp. The decision to end your contracts was signed personally by our chairman. Who is he? Miriam demanded. I want to speak with him. Isabella smiled cryptically and told her that wouldn't be possible. Besides, Ms. Hayes, you've already met him, Isabella added. Miriam was confused. She had dealt with Stellar for years, but never with the top leadership. She had never even seen a photo of the chairman. Isabella chuckled and asked Miriam if she really hadn't figured it out yet. The chairman of the Stellar Group is Edward, Isabella revealed. Your husband. The group gasped in disbelief. Joey laughed out loud. You've got to be kidding. Edward is a nobody from the sticks. How could he run a global company? You're obviously just sleeping with him. You're just lying for him, Joey continued. The people around them started laughing, joking about how lucky Edward was to find such a powerful woman to lie for him. Miriam's face got darker with every comment. As the laughter grew, a custom black Lincoln pulled up to the entrance. The car stood out even among the sea of high-end vehicles. Everyone watched as the door opened and a man in a sharp black suit stepped out. Someone in the crowd gasped, noticing that the suit was a custom piece that hadn't even hit the runways yet. They assumed this was the Lockwood Air. The crowd started whispering excitedly. Even Miriam turned to look, but when she saw the man's face, she froze. At that exact moment, others recognized him too. My mother shrieked his name in disbelief. It was me. I had been gone for weeks, and now I was walking toward the entrance, talking on my headset to my mother. I didn't even notice Miriam's group. I'm here, Mom, I said into the mic. I just got back from the orphanage, and I'm heading inside now. My parents had invited me on this trip last minute, and I hadn't thought much of it. I only realized after we landed that the entire gala was my mother's idea. I hated these events, but I could never say no to her. I had spent the entire day at the orphanage where I was raised, donating supplies and playing with the kids. By the time I got back to the hotel, the party was already in full swing. I ended the call and started toward the ballroom, but my path was blocked. I looked up to see my biological parents standing there. Where have you been, Edward? My father demanded. And how much did you waste renting that car? You think we're made of money? They clearly thought I had used whatever money I'd left to rent the car just to show off. They couldn't fathom that I might actually own it. Their faces twisted with disgust. I thought you were done with us, my mother sneered. But you're still happy to waste our money on rentals. Joey chimed in, mocking my suit. That's obviously a knockoff. You could never afford a designer brand like that. My mother was livid. You're wearing fakes to a Lockwood event? Are you trying to embarrass us? Get back in that car right now. She tried to push me back toward the car, but I caught her arm and shoved it away. I told her that I meant what I said and that we were done. I warned her not to touch me. I tried to walk past them, but Miriam stepped into my path. She demanded to know where I had been, her voice sharp and accusatory. What are you wearing? And what is your business with Isabella Frost? She asked. I looked her in the eye and told her it was none of her concern. It had only been a few weeks, but Miriam looked at me like I was a stranger. She had always known I was attractive, but I looked different now, more confident and powerful than she had ever seen. The Millers had never spent a dime on my wardrobe. I had spent years wearing Joey's hand-me-downs that never fit me properly. Now, in my custom suit, I looked like a different person. She wondered what could have happened to me in such a short time. I looked at her coldly and told her to sign the divorce papers. My lawyer had already informed me that she was stalling. I told her I could force the divorce through the courts, but I would rather avoid a public spectacle. It would be easier for everyone if she just cooperated. Miriam's eyes widened. Why are you doing this, Edward? Is it just because I wouldn't sleep with you? She was clearly on the verge of an outburst. A staff member approached us and asked for our invitations, noting that we were blocking the entrance for other guests. Miriam tried to compose herself and told me to go home, saying saying we would talk after the party. I laughed and asked her if she really couldn't see that I was a guest. Her friends erupted in laughter. They asked me if I even knew where I was or whose party this was. They mocked me, saying that even if I was sleeping with Isabella, there was no way I'd be invited to a private Lockwood event. They called it the funniest joke they'd ever heard. The staff member finished checking their invitations and turned to me, asking for mine. I didn't move. Miriam's friends laughed louder. My father's face was red with embarrassment as he asked if I really thought a rental car and a fake suit would get me inside. "Stop embarrassing us and go home," he shouted. He told me that if I had any conscience left, I would go and apologize to Ms. Frost for my behavior. My mother screamed that I was trying to bankrupt the family. She tried to grab my arm again, but I jerked away and told her their problems were not mine. I turned to the staff member and told him that I didn't have an invitation. I explained that since the party was for me, I didn't think I needed one. There was a moment of silence before the girls burst into fits of laughter. They couldn't believe I had the nerve to claim the party was for me. "So you're saying you're the Lockwood heir?" they teased. "Everyone in Chicago knows you're just the Miller's charity case." They joked that I must have been in a psych ward while I was gone. They laughed about my delusions and told me to wake up. They were laughing so hard they were crying. My parents were shaking with rage, asking if I had completely lost my mind. My mother grabbed my arm violently and tried to drag me away. Her nails dug into my skin, leaving red marks on my wrist. Miriam looked concerned and was about to intervene when a deep voice called out from the hotel entrance, asking what all the commotion was about. The voice was calm, but commanded immediate attention. Everyone turned to see a man and a woman walking out together. Someone whispered that it was the Lockwoods. My mother immediately stopped shouting and began frantically fixing her hair and clothes. Mrs. Lockwood walked straight toward us. Her eyes immediately locked onto the red marks on my wrist. Her expression became terrifyingly cold as she asked what was going on. My mother tried to explain, but Joey beat her to it. He told Mrs. Lockwood that I was just making a scene and had made an offensive joke about being her son. The crowd gasped. My parents were terrified that my behavior would somehow reflect poorly on them and ruin their standing with the Lockwoods. My father rushed forward to apologize, claiming that I had mental health issues and was just talking nonsense. He begged for their forgiveness. They watched the Lockwoods anxiously, but their expressions only grew colder. Mr. Lockwood scoffed, calling the situation ridiculous. "I've known Edward his entire life," Mr. Lockwood said. "I've never noticed any mental problems." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents were frozen in shock. Before they could process his words, Mrs. Lockwood pulled me into a protective embrace. She gently touched the marks on my wrist and asked if I was hurt. When she called me her son, everyone stopped breathing. Joey was the first to speak, stammering about whether the Lockwoods were my adoptive parents. Mrs. Lockwood looked at him with disdain. "Adoptive parents? Edward is our flesh and blood." Her words hit the crowd like a physical blow. No one dared to make a sound. Miriam's friends, who had been mocking me seconds ago, looked like they were going to faint. The man they had called a country bumpkin was the Lockwood heir. Realizing what they had done, they started stammering apologies. They told me they were just joking and begged me not to take it personally. They begged for forgiveness, but I just looked at them with disgust. I was about to tell them I didn't care. My mother interrupted me, telling them that actions have consequences. She asked them if they understood that simple fact. The silence returned, heavier than before. She looked at them with a gaze that could kill. She told the girls to bring their parents to the Lockwood estate to apologize in person. Then she turned her attention to my parents and Miriam. She noted that Edward was being kind by only canceling their contracts. "I'm not as nice as he is," she said coldly. "I want to see you all in the poorhouse." She was true to her word. Over the next few weeks, she systematically dismantled every supply chain and business connection the Miller and Hayes families had. The Millers were on the brink of total collapse. My biological parents started camping out at my hotel every day, hoping for a chance to talk to me. They tried to use our blood relation as a way to get back into my good graces, but my security wouldn't even let them into the lobby. Miriam managed to keep her company afloat longer than the Millers did, but it took everything she had. She was physically and emotionally exhausted. One evening, as she was leaving her office, she found Joey waiting for her. He looked a mess, his eyes red and his voice shaking. He told her that my parents hadn't spoken to him in days. Now that they were losing everything, they didn't have time for their fake son anymore. Miriam asked him what he wanted, her voice flat with exhaustion. Joey looked at her and asked her for a promise. "You're not going to leave me for Edward now that you know who he really is, are you?" he asked. "When is that divorce going to be final?" He was terrified. He thought he had one when I left, but he never imagined that I had such powerful backing. Even the Millers didn't care about him anymore. He knew that if Miriam left him, he would have nothing left in the world. Miriam's expression hardened when he mentioned the divorce. She told him that she and Edward were still married and to stop talking like that. As she turned to leave, Joey shouted after her. He accused her her of only caring about the Lockwood name, just like everyone else. "How can you do this to me?" he cried. "Have you forgotten your promise? Have you forgotten how long I waited for you? Have you forgotten who saved your life after that hunting accident?" he asked. Miriam felt a pang of guilt at his words, but something about his last sentence made her stop. She looked at him and asked him to repeat what he had said about the gully. Joey insisted that he had saved her from the gully. Miriam narrowed her eyes and noted that she had woken up in a cave, not a gully. Joey went pale. "I was the one who had actually found her in the woods. I was the one who had carried her to safety through the dangerous terrain." Joey had just overheard a few details from the doctors at the hospital and decided to take the credit for himself. He had no idea what had actually happened that day. Now that he was cornered, he tried to lie his way out, but Miriam was far too smart for him. She asked him if he had seen any wild animals. Joey looked away and mumbled that he hadn't. Miriam's eyes went cold. She might have been semi-conscious, but she vividly remembered hearing wolves and then a gunshot before she blacked out. She had been so blinded by her gratitude toward Joey that she had never questioned his story. Now she realized how absurd it was. Joey was a terrible rider and a coward. There was no way he could have stood up to a pack of wolves. If it wasn't Joey, there was only one person it could have been. Miriam gripped Joey's arm and demanded the truth. Her voice was like ice. She told him that lying was the one thing she could never forgive. She gave him one final chance to tell her who had really saved her. Joey folded instantly under her gaze. "It was Edward," he cried. Miriam felt the world spinning around her as she staggered back. Her assistant immediately made a few calls to the hunting lodge to verify the story. Within minutes, the truth was out. The assistant whispered to Miriam that Edward was indeed the one who had saved her. He added that I had fought off a pack of wolves and carried her out on my back despite having multiple bite wounds. Miriam felt a chill run down her spine. She finally understood why I had been so pale and weak that day. But I had never said a word about it. I hadn't stayed silent because it didn't hurt. I stayed silent because I knew that neither she nor my parents would have cared even if they knew. The realization was like a knife to her heart. She turned to leave immediately, ignored Joey as he screamed after her, asking where she was going. "So I lied, so what?" Joey shouted. "I thought you loved me. If you go after him now, don't ever come back." Miriam stopped for a second, giving Joey a moment of hope. But then she told him not to worry because she wasn't coming back anyway. She walked away without looking back, desperate to find me. She had been trying to fix her company and look strong for the Lockwoods, but none of that mattered now. Knowing that I had risked my life for her changed everything. She tried to see me, but I refused her visits. Her parents were starting to panic as well. Her mother blamed her, saying that if she had been kinder to me, I never would have left. She insisted that if they had a child together, I would have stayed. The mention of a child gave Miriam an idea. She couldn't believe she had forgotten about their options. She rushed to the fertility clinic and told the doctor she wanted to begin the process with the embryos we had frozen years ago. She was convinced that if she got pregnant, I would have to come back to her. She thought those embryos were her last chance to save their marriage. The doctor looked at her with pity. He informed her that I had already ordered the destruction of all our frozen embryos. Miriam went pale as the doctor explained the situation. He told her he had no choice but to follow my orders. He explained that I had actually bought the entire clinic and was now his employer. He was legally bound to follow my instructions and keep them from her. Miriam couldn't believe it. She realized then that I had been planning the divorce for a long time. Everything was already in motion before she even suspected a thing. She couldn't understand why I was so determined to erase her from my life. Eventually, she went to my hotel and waited outside for 3 days. She finally caught us as we were leaving for the airport. My adoptive parents immediately tried to call security to have her removed. I told them I would handle it. I walked over to Miriam. She looked terrible, her eyes red from crying and her face thin. She begged me to talk to her. She promised she would be a better wife and that we could start over. She was desperate. She pleaded with me to stay. She had convinced herself that the only reason I was leaving was because she hadn't been intimate with me. She believed that 3 years of a sexless marriage would drive any man away. She thought that if she finally gave herself to me, I would change my mind. She knew how much I had loved her in the past. She started to make her promise, but I cut her off. "That's enough," I said. I looked at her desperate face and told her she was delusional if she thought this was just about sex. Miriam froze. I explained it simply. I told her I only wanted her before because I loved her. But now I don't love you, I finished. It was like a physical blow to her. She stood there, her knuckles turning white as she clenched her fists. She whispered that it was impossible. She couldn't accept that my feelings had changed so completely. She remembered the man who would stay up all night to cook for her and spend months making her handmade birthday gifts. She begged me to stop lying, asking why I would have saved her life if I didn't love her. Even then, she thought I was just acting out because of how she had treated me. She thought it was all just a game. She believed that if she just apologized enough, enough, I would come back to her. She didn't understand that it was truly over. I just laughed. I told her that saving her life had nothing to do with love. It was about repaying a debt. She looked confused. I reminded her of the kidnapping years ago and told her I had considered our accounts settled after I saved her from the wolves. Then I dropped the bombshell. I told her I knew the kidnapping had been staged. I told her I realized I had never actually owed her a thing. Miriam went pale again. She started to speak, but I cut her off, telling her I knew everything. I know you married me for your family business and always intended to divorce me, I said. I told her I knew she wanted to humiliate me to get revenge for Joey. I looked her in the eye and asked her a question. Was it my fault I was lost as a child? I asked, did I ask to be found? Did anyone ever ask for my opinion on this marriage? I told her that my entire life had been decided by others. I had been forced into roles I never wanted. So why am I the one being blamed for everything? I asked, what did I actually do to deserve this? She looked at me, her heart breaking, but she couldn't find the words to respond. I told her I knew they had been a happy little family before I came along and ruined everything for them. I was the outsider who disrupted their perfect world. In their eyes, I was the one who broke everything. So I'm leaving, I said calmly. You can go back to how things were. Isn't that what you wanted all along? I turned and walked away without looking back. Miriam cried out my name, but she couldn't move. She stood there, frozen. Her assistant finally spoke up, asking why she didn't tell me the truth about the kidnapping. Miriam looked at him, confused. He reminded her that while she had planned a fake kidnapping, the real one had been very different. He reminded her that she had been seriously injured trying to save me during the actual kidnapping. Very few people knew what had really happened that day. Everyone thought it was all just a game she played, but the reality was far more dangerous. She had planned a prank, but real criminals had taken over the situation. They had killed her actors and taken Joey and me for real. I really was in mortal danger that day in the warehouse when my parents chose to save Joey and leave me behind. The kidnappers were actual murderers who intended to kill me. Miriam had gone in alone to save me after she realized what was happening. She had been stabbed 3 times and nearly died saving me. She had spent years wondering why she had taken such a risk. She told herself she did it out of guilt because the situation was her fault. She told herself she couldn't live with my death on her conscience. She told herself it was about the business relationship between our families. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the truth. In that moment, she hadn't been thinking about business or guilt. She just knew she couldn't let me die. She finally realized that she had been in love with me since that day, even if she had been too proud to admit it. She loved me from the start, even though she resented how my arrival had upended her life and her plans for Joey. She had only agreed to the marriage because of her parents, and she had entered the chapel full of anger and plans for an eventual divorce. She wanted to marry me and then dump me to get revenge for Joey. But over time, her feelings had changed. She couldn't pinpoint when it happened. Maybe it was when I blushed and thanked her for her kindness, or our first kiss. She thought she was in control, but she was the one falling. She had fallen in love with me without even realizing it. That was why she had panicked so much when I went missing. She had been happy on our wedding day, despite her cold exterior. She could have divorced me years ago, but she never did. She had been in love with me for years, but was too stubborn to admit it. Joey's suicide attempt on our wedding day had complicated everything. Joey had made her promise never to be a real wife to me. She had agreed out of a sense of obligation to the man she was supposed to love. Miriam was a woman of her word, so she had suppressed her feelings for me and kept her distance even when she wanted to be close. She had pushed me away and acted like she didn't care just to keep her promise to Joey. In doing so, she had destroyed our marriage herself. The weight of it all was too much. She began to cough violently and collapsed to the ground, spitting blood onto the pavement. Her staff rushed her to the hospital. The doctors discovered that she had an aggressive, fast-moving form of cancer. It was already terminal by the time it was detected. The doctor explained that her best chance was a specialized stem cell therapy. He suggested that she get pregnant, as they could use the cells during pregnancy for the treatment. He assured her it would be safe for the baby. Miriam was speechless. Her family and Joey rushed to her side. Joey was devastated by the news, and all their previous fighting was forgotten. Joey immediately offered to be the father, telling her she didn't even have to marry him or make any promises. He just wanted her to save her own life. Despite his flaws, his love for her was genuine in that moment. He was willing to do anything to save her, but Miriam pulled her hand away and refused him. Joey's face went pale. Her parents begged her to reconsider, telling her that this wasn't the time for pride. Joey cried, telling her she could use a donor if she didn't want him to be the father. He just wanted her to survive. Miriam was firm. She told them she would only have a child with Edward, and that she would rather die than have anyone else's baby. Joey was devastated. Miriam turned to her assistant and told him to go to Italy and tell me she was sick. She told him to tell me that she would refuse all treatment unless I agreed to have a child with her. The next day, in Milan, my mother came into my room as I was waking up. She had a strange look on her face, and I asked her what was wrong. She told me she had received a message from Miriam in Chicago. She had some things she wanted to tell me. I immediately told her I didn't want to hear it. She looked at me seriously and asked if I was sure. My mother had originally planned to ignore the message, but the content had shocked her. She hadn't expected Miriam to be dying. She was appalled that Miriam was using her own life and treatment as leverage to get me back. It was the ultimate form of emotional blackmail. She hadn't wanted to tell me, but she was worried I might regret it later since it was a matter of life and death. She asked me again if I was sure. I didn't hesitate. I told her I didn't want to hear it and that Miriam's death was none of my concern. I wasn't being cruel or hateful. It was just a fact. I had cut all ties when I left Chicago. I was no longer responsible for her. My mother looked at me for a moment and then smiled, proud of my strength. She went to the door and told the messenger to tell Miriam that my son would not be her cure. She told Miriam to find another way to survive and to stop using her life as a weapon against me. To me, it was just a minor disturbance that was quickly forgotten. 6 months passed, and much had changed. The Millers were officially bankrupt, and my biological parents were now working menial jobs just to survive. Joey's true character emerged once the money ran out. He stopped pretending to be the perfect son, and my parents finally realized he only ever loved their money. It was too late for regrets. The Hayes Company was still barely holding on, but they had lost everything that made them powerful. An American lawyer visited me one day. I thought it was about the divorce, but he informed me that Miriam had died. He told me that she had left her entire estate to me. I was speechless. Miriam was gone. I found myself standing in a Chicago cemetery, looking at her photo on the headstone. My feelings were complicated. I never thought our last meeting would be our final one. My mother stood beside me and asked if I blamed her for what happened. She reminded me that Miriam had refused treatment because I wouldn't agree to have a child with her. She reminded me of what I had said. She told me she had kept the details from me to protect me. She told me I could blame her if I needed to. I looked at her and smiled, telling her not to worry. I told her I had made my own choice and that she wasn't responsible for it. I told her it was my decision, not hers. She still looked worried, wondering if things would have been different if she had told me everything. I assured her that even if I had known, I wouldn't have gone back. Miriam had made her own choices about her life and her death. I told her that Miriam couldn't use her life to control me. She had followed through on her threat and refused all other treatments. Without the treatment, she hadn't lasted 6 months. I felt no guilt or regret about the outcome. Some might see her actions as romantic or tragic, but to me, it was just another attempt at emotional manipulation. I didn't care if she loved me. It was too little, too late. Her final act was just repulsive to me. She clearly thought her love gave her the right to use her life as leverage to force me back in her life. A child conceived under those circumstances wouldn't have been about love. It would have been about control. It was pure selfishness. She was sick, but her cancer wasn't her only illness. Even in death, she was entirely focused on her own desires. She had miscalculated. I wasn't going to let guilt control me. I had already moved on and become indifferent to her long before I left Chicago. Her death changed nothing. I walked away from the grave without a second thought. I told the lawyer to donate everything she had left me to charity. I didn't want any of her money. As for Joey, things didn't go well for him either. He had been devastated after Miriam's death, but he eventually found a wealthy older woman to support him. Unfortunately for him, the woman's husband was a dangerous man. Joey was eventually caught and beaten so badly he was unrecognizable. He lost his only asset, his looks, and died alone and penniless from a terrible disease. In just 1 year, my entire life had changed. I was finally back on track and in control of my own destiny. My future was wide open, and I was finally free. From now on, things were only going to get better. After reading Edward's journey, you might feel a chilling coldness, but more than that, you likely feel a sense of liberating clarity. We are often raised to be forgiving and a cave in the face of emotional blackmail like, "I'm dying" or "I'm still your parent." However, Edward's resolve reveals a brave truth. Any extortion that uses life or biological ties as leverage is not love, it is control. The most profound part of this story isn't the satisfaction of revenge, but the lesson of self-reconstruction. First, late-blooming affection is never a form of compensation. To an outsider, Miriam's fatal ultimatum might look like a tragic sacrifice for love, but to Edward, it was a final invasion of his free will. This serves as a vital reminder that if someone fails to cherish you when you're standing tall, their supposed heartbreak after losing you is usually just self-pity over their own failure. You owe nothing to this belated devotion, and you certainly shouldn't sacrifice your future peace to satisfy it. Second, you must refuse to play the victim. Edward's greatest strength was was his refusal to play the roles others tried to force on him, whether it was being the Miller family's cheap replacement or Miriam's loyal lapdog. In the real world, we are often trapped by the expectations of those around us. Just remember that you are not a sequel to someone else's life, nor are you anyone's savior. When the world tries to grind you into the dirt, you have every right to board your own metaphorical private jet and fly toward a place where you are truly welcomed. Third, true strength lies in the power of indifference. This coldness isn't meant to cause harm. It is meant to protect your soul. When a man can calmly state that someone else's life or death is none of his concern, it proves he is broken out of the prison of guilt. True growth happens when you can look at those who hurt you and feel neither burning hatred nor desperate love. You simply feel a vast, quiet nothingness. My friends, perhaps you're currently trapped in a cycle of being misunderstood, belittled, or emotionally blackmailed. You might not have a massive inheritance waiting for you, but you still possess the same power Edward had, the power to rewrite your own ending. Stop waiting for people who never valued you to finally see your worth, and stop compromising your own well-being just to prove you are a good person. True kindness should have teeth, and its first priority must be to protect the wounded version of yourself that has fought so hard to survive. I hope you can be like Edward and brush off the dust of the past once and for all. You don't need to look back or offer explanations. Your life truly begins the moment you decide to live for yourself. From here on out, your path will only get brighter.